Afternoon and welcome to all of you joining us. I can see our attendees are filing in from the waiting room. Thank you so much for being with us today. Welcome to this IIEA webinar on the subject of global trends in ending violence against women and girls. My name is Katrina Dowd and I'm an assistant professor at the School of Politics and International Relations at UCD and member of the IIEA Security and Defence Group. It is my pleasure to chair today's event and to welcome to this event Reem Alsalem, United Nations Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls, its Causes and Consequences. Violence against women and girls is a persistent and escalating crisis and remains one of the most pervasive human rights violations worldwide. Despite international commitments to gender equality, many legal frameworks are still insufficient. Impunity persists, and survivors are too often met with stigma rather than support. To discuss this important topic, Reem Alsalem, UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls, will address today discussing this pervasive crisis and share insights into the global trends, emerging challenges, and opportunities for progress in the fight to end violence against women and girls. Ms. Alsalem will give a presentation for about 20 minutes, and then we'll go to Q&A. You'll be able to join the discussion using the Q&A function on Zoom. To ensure that we have time to ask questions, please feel free to send your questions in throughout the session, and we'll ask them to Ms. Alsalem when she has finished her presentation. Many of you will be familiar with this convention at IIEA events, but please do indicate your affiliation or the institution or organization from which you're joining when you put a question. Please note that today's presentation and Q&A are both on the record, and you can join the discussion on X using the handle @IIEA. Just a note before we proceed, I know you will all be aware of the topic of today's discussion, given the title of Ms. Alsalem's mandate and role. But I know also that we can be caught unawares sometimes by the impact and gravity of some of these, even the trends, the figures, never mind the stories themselves. So please be aware, if you are affected by anything we discussed today, there are helplines and support available, including Women's Aid and the LGBT helpline, which you can access through their helplines and their resources online, just so those are available to people. So lastly, before beginning, I'd like to formally introduce our speaker and hand over to her. Ms. Reem Alsalem was appointed United Nations Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls in July 2021 by the UN Human Rights Council. She's an independent consultant on gender issues, the rights of refugees and migrants, transitional justice and humanitarian response. She has consulted extensively the United Nations departments, agencies and programs such as UN Women, OHCHR, UNICEF and IOM, as well as for non-governmental organizations, think tanks and academia. Previously, she worked as an international civil servant, serving with the UNHCR in 13 countries. During her service, she planned, implemented, and monitored programs that served to protect persons that were survivors of gender-based violence, particularly women and girls. She was also a visiting professional with the Prosecutor's Office of the ICC from January to March 2009, and a visiting researcher with the Feinstein International Center of Tufts University in December 2008. She holds a master's in international relations from the American University in Cairo and a master's in human rights law from Oxford University, an incredibly distinguished and I'm sure only partial biography. So I'll pass over to you now, Ms. Alsalem, and thank you so much again for being with us.
Thank you very much, Katrina, and please feel free to call me Reem. Also a big thank you to the Institute of International and European Affairs and to all those that have joined us today. I know that many of you will know what a special rapporteur is, since Ireland has a few and has had a few also over the last decades, but I think it might be useful to say a couple of words about that for those who don't know about this. So the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls is a special procedure that turns 31 years old this year. It's one actually of the first special procedures that was established by the Human Rights Commission at the time, that was now succeeded by the Human Rights Council. And unlike perhaps what may be thought of, we are not staff of the United Nations, so I do not report to the Secretary General of the UN or the High Commissioner for Human Rights or any UN official. I report to the Council. I do this in a voluntary capacity. I was appointed by virtue of my expertise on this particular issue, like my other colleagues. And I've been doing this now for close to 4 years. So in fact, one of the many things that I've been doing is tracking a little bit, as was said, the panorama, the global sort of situation when it comes to violence against women and girls. And that is what I wanted to share with you today. So violence against women and girls is actually a severe form of gender-based discrimination against women and girls. It is by virtue of their female sex, but it's also intersecting with other grounds. So while women and girls generally experience discrimination and violence, the situation of particular groups of women and girls in terms of discrimination and violence can be more acute because of other factors, such as, for example, their ethnicity, their race, their religious affiliation, their political views, for example, whether they have a disability, and so on and so forth. And it's very clear, and I'm sure you will not be surprised, that the multiple mega crises that we have been experiencing has also exacerbated the exposure of women and girls to discrimination and violence. By that, I mean, COVID-19. There's been research that has shown that during lockdown, the rates of domestic violence, for example, against women has increased. You have also the proliferation of conflict and wars around the world, and with it, humanitarian crises, which are increasingly underfunded, and I will get to that in a minute. And then also you have the issue of climate change and environmental degradation, and I'll say a few words about that as well. When it comes to women in times of conflict, I have to say that I'm extremely concerned by what I see, not just as an erosion of the protections that civilians enjoy during conflict, but really also the specific protections that women are afforded in times of conflict and war by the Geneva Conventions and other humanitarian law instruments. And I think the one, I would say, precise situation that has given a potentially irreversible blow is, of course, the unfolding genocide in Palestine. The deliberate killing, large-scale killing of Palestinian women in Gaza, because they are Palestinian, because they are women, because also of their reproductive capacity as bearing children that are Palestinian, has been, I think, unprecedented in any conflict. And in addition to, of course, what's happening in Gaza, we have seen that also sexual violence, gender-based violence, is increasingly used as a tool of war in other conflicts, in other situations of insecurity. And by conflict, I don't necessarily just mean wars between, obviously, regular armies. I also mean the fight for control between criminal gangs, as we see, for example, in Haiti, or we've seen in parts of Mexico. So there's an increased use also of gender-based violence against women and girls, whether it's rape as a tool of war, whether it's also in trafficking of women and girls, sexual slavery, and other sort of manifestations. And it's very clear that this is used deliberately to subjugate the enemy, to instill fear and terror in the civilian population. And one of the things I've been tracking is the use of reproductive violence as a tool of war. And that is something I'll be speaking more to in my upcoming report, which I'm presenting to the Human Rights Council in June, how also reproductive violence is used as a genocidal tool in Gaza, but also in other areas. And related to that is, of course, the very unsatisfactory an appallingly limited participation of women in peace-building efforts, in conflict resolutions, despite the international recognition that this should happen, despite the fact that Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security clearly stipulates that. That resolution is turning 25 years old this year. We are nowhere near where we need to be. And we know that women, being half of society, must be at the table, fully participating in mediating conflicts, but also in charting the way forward for a post-conflict scenario. And when they are not there, that limits, obviously, the proposals that come out, but also it severely limits the inclusion of their own needs and specific specificities in any peace-building scenario. I had also talked about environmental degradation and climate change being part of this multiple mega crises that affect women and girls' enjoyment of equality. And in fact, this is an issue that I dedicated a whole report on in 2022. You can look at the report yourself, but suffice to say here, and again, it's not a surprise, that climate crisis aggravates all types of gender-based violence that women and girls experience. And even at the time, with perhaps the more limited data that was available, now we have a lot more studies and a lot more data. But in those countries that are most affected by climate change and environmental degradation, it's clear that almost all aspects of the lives of women and girls has been significantly impacted, as well as their enjoyment of their fundamental freedoms. And that we see in particular after also natural disasters, when you see a breakdown of law and order and also unavailability of specific services that women and girls may need. And so that leads to really them being unable to get assistance and protection, even less than before a disaster struck. And then, of course, also given the consequence of reduced availability of food and water, we are seeing in many parts of the world affected by climate change and environmental degradation that more and more women and girls are driven into exploitative situations, are sexually exploited, in particular, in exchange for food or water or fuel or other natural resources. At the same time, and not to be completely grim in the picture I'm painting, there has been more and more of a discussion and an awareness of this issue and the gendered impact of climate change and environmental degradation. Obviously, it has featured also in the many international discussions like the COP. And there has been a concerted effort also to be more gender responsive when it comes to, for example, national plans to do with disaster risk reduction, with climate resilience, and so on and so forth. And so we have seen, for example, that in last year, 53% of countries reported gender responsive laws when it comes to disasters, risk reduction, climate resilience, and that's up from 34% in 2019. So there is a growing recognition, actually, of that impact, but also the importance of including women to have sustainable solutions for the climate crisis. Now, when we come to the issue of laws and policies on gender equality and ending violence against women and girls, generally speaking, I would say that today women enjoy perhaps only 77% of men's legal rights. So obviously there is still no equality, legal equality between men and women in a number of places around the world. Yes, there have been efforts made by a number of countries. A number of countries have adopted legal reforms in order to advance gender equality. We've seen, for example, over 1,500 legal reforms that were made in around 88% of countries around the world, and 88% of countries have actually passed laws in one form or another to eliminate violence against women. And close to 80% of countries have either set up, updated, or expanded their own national action plans to end violence. That's great. At the same time, the devil is in the detail. And when you have great laws and great, let's say, plans, national programs, but they don't have the teeth to be enforced, then these efforts fall short of what they intended to achieve. And one of the biggest challenges in the face of implementing these laws and national programs are the reduced resources that governments are dedicating to programs that want to end violence against women and girls. So we see more and more reduced budgets and reduced women-specific services. That's because of the austerity measures that are increasingly being adopted by countries around the world, including affluent countries. And we see that the first thing that gets sacrificed are programs that are aimed at the most vulnerable groups in society, whether it's persons with disability, whether it's older persons, whether it's women and girls. And so this is obviously very concerning. And just to give you an example also about what I mean, in the last 2 years, I have written 3 letters to 3 different governments that have either discontinued or eliminated the ministry they had for gender equality or for women. That is Korea, Argentina, and recently Canada. So some of them have even combined, let's say, that ministry or that portfolio with others. But of course, for me, it's very concerning because it dilutes the efforts and the dedicated action towards ending violence against women and girls. The other issue is that, of course, you have the continued impunity for crimes committed. And that is something I am tracking also in the last 2 years. I have seen that, including in countries which have very good legislative frameworks, there seems to be an emerging concerning trend where we see perpetrators who commit acts of violence against women and girls getting off the hook. We still see a lot of victim blaming. We see still reduced sentences for crimes committed. We see perpetrators being released early, not even completing their sentences under the basically premise that prisons are too full. And we see that still as a problem, including in countries that have, let's say, reformed their laws to make them more centered around the issue of consent. So ensuring that any sexual acts have the explicit consent of the persons concerned, including, let's say, the women. And that is something also I will be looking at in more details in an addendum report, which I will present also to the Council in June. So unfortunately, we still see also a lot of gender bias against women and girls in courts, amongst law enforcement. And we see that also that kind of bias perpetrated or disseminated widely by the media, how they, for example, report on instances of femicide when a female partner is killed, how the reporting is done about the perpetrator. And we see it as well when media reports, for example, on the killing of prostituted women. It tends to normalize that violence. It turns to portray it as something that was an unfortunate accident, basically, in a work environment. So there we have a lot of issues there. And of course, with the austerity measures and with the reduction in dedicated services that are victim-centered, we see also the slashing of free legal aid, which is really important for groups of marginalized and excluded women that don't have the means to pay for legal aid, whether they're migrant women, indigenous women, refugee women, so all sorts of different groups that struggle actually to be able to be represented in courts. And we know that there's already an issue of underreporting, but then when you don't have enough services for victims of violence that are also female specific, then you basically discourage victims even more from coming forward. And when victims see that there's an issue of impunity and that those that are perpetrating crimes are getting off the hook, then that discourages reporting even more and more. I also wanted to say something about the participation of women in public life, in particular in politics. As some of you may know, the mandate has produced a report on violence against women in politics, because that is something that my predecessor was tracking and that I continue also to engage on quite a bit. So on one hand, it's positive to see that, for example, women's representation in parliaments has more than doubled. So it's reached in 2025 around 27% globally. So there are different countries that have made enormous strides. For example, Rwanda, it's at 61%. Cuba, it's at 53.4%. At the same time, even if, let's say, there are more efforts done to increase the participation of women in politics and in parliaments and in parties, I would say that the attacks on women in politics have also been increasing. So we see that there's particularly a lot of attacks online, but not only on women in politics, but also women that are basically visible publicly. So women that are journalists, they could be women athletes, they could be also writers, and again, depending on the context, women from certain backgrounds could be more exposed to that violence. And the fact that online technology, digitally facilitated technology, has also allowed this kind of violence to proliferate and to increase, because, of course, those committing it can hide behind the screens and continue to perpetrate this violence. And it has a chilling effect on the participation of women and anyone who wants to have a more prominent public role in society. So that is something that countries still have to come to grips with. And it's very unfortunate that in 2025, we still see that many women, including in politics, are not allowed really to express themselves on issues that are important to them and that are still getting attacked and hounded and demonized because of their views and because they want to raise issues that they feel are important for women. When it comes to economic participation, I think we still have a long way to go on this, despite the fact that more and more countries are making efforts on that front to increase the participation of women in economic life. The reality is, though, that they still earn 20% less on average than men. And the reality is that women's participation in the labor force is 63% compared to 92% for men. We're talking about age groups of 25 to 54 years of age. And that is for a number of reasons. Some of it still has to do with the stereotyping about where women belong in society and what they should do. The fact that women still perform about 75% of global unpaid care work, and the fact that most women are the informal work sector still hires predominantly women. And the fact also that many women don't have access to adequate social protection schemes, and so that all means that we still have a long way to go on that front. Now, speaking specifically on the issue of violence, as you know, violence against women can be either sexual, physical, can also be psychological. It can be an actual act of violence or the threat of violence, coercion, arbitrary deprivation of liberty, whether occurring in public or in private life. And some forms of violence could amount to torture, obviously, inhumane and degrading treatment. And states under international law have a responsibility to end violence and to provide support and assistance to survivors of violence, to ensure they have access to reparations, non-repetition of the crime, and also they have a responsibility to basically exercise due diligence. So also to ensure that those that committed violence privately are also held responsible if it's under their jurisdiction. Violence against women and girls is very real, in the sense that while men and boys can, of course, experience gender-based violence, the majority of victims of gender-based violence are females, so are women and girls. And of course, as a rapporteur, I've been working on the long-standing manifestations of violence that we all know about, and that have been identified for a long time. So, and it's not to sort of minimize them, but things like domestic violence or intimate partner violence, things like female genital mutilation, child marriage, of course, trafficking, the violence that happens, as I said, during conflict. But as part of my role as rapporteur, I'm also tracking what I like to call as new and emerging forms of violence. By that, I mean manifestations of violence that we have not yet completely understood or unpacked or examined, also from a human rights perspective. So to give you an example, when we talk about femicide, for example, which continues to be a huge problem, and that continues to affect really a lot of women around the world, there are situations, for example, where women are driven because of the coercive control they experience, because of the psychological violence that is being inflicted on them by current or former partners, to commit suicide. So I would say that this is a sort of a form of femicide that hasn't yet completely entered into our consciousness. And in general, I would say it's only in the last few years that states have started to really understand and coercive control and put that on the radar screen. And some countries have also included that in their laws on ending violence, but not everybody is there yet. So this is what I mean by emerging forms of violence against women that we haven't completely yet kind of mastered or understood. And then there's another thing that I'm tracking, but I'll speak more about this in my report. But I think that we are actually in a phase where we seem to be cementing and solidifying gender stereotypes rather than undermining them or fighting them. Because, of course, some of the most pernicious sexist stereotypes that fuel violence against women and girls are those that objectify females, that sexualize them, that commodify females, their bodies, that eroticize violence. And that is due to things like the normalization and the immense dissemination of pornography and consumption of pornography, the attempts to also normalize the purchase of sexual acts and buying of women in prostitution. And of course, states have an obligation to eliminate stereotypes according to international law. But societies seem to be kind of going in some places in a different direction. So I would say also that in some societies we see a tension between fulfilling the obligation to combat stereotypes and some aspects then of gender identity theory, which in my view are heavily based on stereotypes. Because they frame, they're based on stereotypes, and they frame sexist norms about how women and men should dress and behave as a form of gender expression, which in my view reinforces those stereotypes rather than combats them. So, for example, you are a woman if you have long hair or you put makeup or you wear high heels. When I grew up when I was a child in the 80s, the motto was, you're a girl, but you can be anything. You can be a karate athlete or a fighter. You can be an astronaut. You're not basically limited by being a female. You can still be anything. You can dress as a boy. You can be in love with another woman, but still be a woman. So I sense that there are obviously shifts there that for me are concerning, and I'm going to say a bit more about this also in my report in June. I wanted to also very briefly come back to the issue of femicide, because of course femicide has been coined a while ago as a term, sort of as a phrase to describe the violence that the homicide of women and girls because they are women and girls, and that therefore intended to highlight the specifically sex-based nature of male violence against women and girls. Of course, we all realize that it's still a global emergency. We know that the data we have doesn't even reflect a small part of what's really going on. For example, in 2023, it's estimated that 85,000 women and girls were killed. Over half of them, around 60%, by intimate partners or family members, and that equates to around 1 death every 10 minutes. That's probably the tip of the iceberg, because many go underreported. So, for example, many women and girls go missing, for example, in parts of Latin America or in Africa. They go missing, they're probably dead, but those are not counted. And many also families of victims children of victims don't come forward. And so we really don't have a good understanding of how big this problem is. Now, there are countries that have moved to recognize femicide as a separate crime to homicide. The latest of those, although it hasn't passed yet completely, but is Italy. But still, a lot of countries have not yet recognized femicide as a separate crime, and also therefore don't collect data that allows us to track this crime. And some of that doesn't happen because many countries are struggling actually with sex-specific data in so many areas, including disaggregated data that includes information on sex when it comes to homicides. And therefore, we don't really know how many of the victims are women and girls and how many of the perpetrators are males. And because to understand femicide, you need to know the sex of the victim and you need to know the sex of the perpetrator. But it is at alarming and epidemic levels, as even the Secretary General of the UN has said in so many of his interventions. The mandate, again, has dedicated, I believe, 2 reports to the issue of femicide, one on the issue of femicide and another one actually on the need to establish femicide observatories in order to track really the scale and seriousness of this issue. Another very quick things I just wanted to say also is the fact that that you will hear often that the UN talks about regression in gender equality and backlash against gender equality. You know, we can discuss what that exactly means, but it is true that in a general sense, we see that many of the gains we have made, many of the rights that women and girls have gained and have been taken for granted are being questioned now, are coming under attack. So, for example, in some parts of the world, there's attempts to legalize again child marriage. For example, in Iraq, lately, through a law that they have adopted, there's been a couple of attempts to try to decriminalize female genital mutilation. Last year, I intervened on the Gambia, for example, where that was the issue. And that is still not a finished issue in the Gambia. And then, of course, nothing screams more backlash and regression than actually what we see with regards to the situation of women in Afghanistan. And for me, what's happening in Afghanistan is obviously the most serious kind of example of this backlash. But other than Afghanistan, we do see attempts to erase women as separate categories, to erase women-specific language, to erase also the importance of sex as a ground on which women experience discrimination. And I'm going to also, and violence, and I'm going to say more about that in my upcoming report. Because when you don't actually, when you're not able to name what women are, and you then lose the specificity of women as victims of gender-based violence. And when you don't anymore keep track of sex-specific data, you also lose track of the perpetrators being primarily male, and that also dilutes then the understanding and the assessment of a crime as violence against women and girls. And then you can't really combat it. Very quickly then, just to say that, again, it's not a surprise that one of the challenges that we all collectively have is the increase of violence through digital technology, and the specific nature of those technologies make it also very, very difficult to combat. Just to give you an example, in 2021, in a study on online violence against women in 45 countries, it was found that 85% of women surveyed had encountered online violence, including harassment, the sharing of intimate and sexual content through social media. They've experienced extortion, they've experienced cyberbullying, and then also have been basically captured or fallen prey to pornography and have been exploited in pornography. And while also when it comes to child sexual abuse images, while of course boys experience that too, but 97% of the victims for those are actually girls. And there's a lot that needs to be done there, including ensuring that there are binding laws that also bind the providers of these digital technologies, and that we don't only rely on sort of goodwill actions by digital technology providers, because you cannot have a body of laws that govern violence offline and then have sort of a jungle or a free-for-all on the online side. Not to mention that the online is still real and it still affects women and girls in very real ways. So it's not a figment of our imagination. And then I will close by saying something also about further about the austerity measures, because I want to come back to that, because as we said, you know, the global crises are increasing, conflict, climate change, even at national level, there's more challenges with regards to safety and security of women. But as all that is happening, official development assistance dedicated to gender equality is grossly insufficient and is reducing. So in the year 2022 to 2023, only 4% of official development assistance targeted gender equality as a principal objective. So already that's really scandalous. But then what we're seeing right now is that a number of countries are even reducing the overseas development assistance they are giving. In the past, some states of the United Nations had abided by the UN target to spend 0.7% of their national wealth on overseas development assistance. But in the last few years, we have seen a reduction of that. So to give you an example, the United Kingdom reduced its 0.07 commitment to official development assistance to 0.5% in 2021. And then Sweden abandoned its long-standing commitment of allocating 1% of its gross national income to ODA also in 2024. And then you have had also recently announcements by the Netherlands, Belgium, etc., so on and so forth. And then finally, you have that all happening while we see a very clear increased militarization and spending on militarization. And of course, that means also more resources to launching wars, and wars are not good for women's safety and security. So this is incredibly disturbing. And as we know, a number of countries are still also exporting weapons to countries that have been found to commit large-scale violations, war crimes, crimes against humanity, against women, such as, for example, Israel, despite the fact that even their national laws require them to refrain from exporting weapons to countries where there is evidence that they are doing this. So I will stop here and happy to take any questions.